History tells us that George S. Patton died in a car accident. At least that's the official version.
That's not what the report says.
But history is often clean, too clean. Because when powerful men outlive their usefulness, the story tends to end very quietly. Tonight, I'm not here to tell you what definitely happened with Patton's death. But I am here to walk you through what we know and why there are still people arguing about this even 80 years later. Something doesn't add up. Hope you guys enjoy this video. God bless. By December of 1945, the war was over. Europe lay in ruins, and the Nazis were defeated. And George S. Patton was still George S. Patton. He was a decorated general, a brilliant man, but he was still aggressive and, of course, reckless politically, not caring about his reputation, anti-Soviet to a fault, and, of course, incredibly blunt. Patton did not believe the war was finished, and he believed that the wrong enemy had survived. Both in private and in public, Patton criticized the Soviets. He believed that the Soviets planned to take all of Europe and that we should confront the USSR immediately. He also believed that we should stop the denazification policies to use the Nazis against the Soviets. And of course, the way he went about saying all of this was hardly the most polite way. Now, this mattered politically because at the end of the war, the United States was trying to maintain relationships with the Soviet Union. The US didn't want a whole nother war to get into, they wanted stability, at least in the European regions. And Patton was making himself a liability rather than a useful asset. So they did what institutions always do to inconvenient men. They moved him aside and sidelined him. Patton was removed from operational command and assigned to a governorship over Bavaria. He was pushed out of leadership and made to sit around as other people made big decisions. But this, of course, did not sideline or silence Patton. It only gave him time to talk. He had conversations with journalists, he wrote many private diaries, and of course expressed his frustration with the leadership almost constantly. He intended to return home and speak openly about what he saw during the war and his policy of defeating the Soviets. And of course, his superiors knew Patton was only weeks away from returning to the United States. He was weeks away from microphones and of course, weeks away from testifying to Congress. Now, I do want to say this is not necessarily proof of a plot to kill Patton. He did really want to speak out against the Soviets, but this is definitely some very interesting circumstantial evidence that yes, Patton had enemies, and he had enemies because he was not friendly towards the Soviets. But this is the context that kind of builds this conspiracy. So, I mean, the motive is always about the timing. So I think it's something very important to make sure you remember is, yeah, this is a very good very good reasoning, very good basis for the conspiracy. All right, let's get back into the story. On December 9th, 1945, on a quiet road outside Mannheim, Germany, there was no combat and there was no urgency. Patton's in the backseat of his Jeep. He's driving in his staff car with his driver in the front who he has known for years, and they're involved with a low-speed collision with an army truck. Everyone walks away fine, except for Patton. Patton has a broken neck, but no head trauma. He's quite alert after the crash, but he is paralyzed from the head down. A man who has survived tanks, artillery, machine gun fire, he's brought down by a slow-moving truck. Look, I don't want to say that this is impossible to happen as like a circumstantial thing, but this is certainly unusual. The details of the crash are very odd. We're going to get into those a little bit later in the episode 2. But then we'll get into the hospital stay right after this. Patton is brought to the 130th Station Hospital in Heidelberg, Germany, where he's given medical treatment, a hospital stay, and there's initially optimism about him surviving, but then suddenly complications come up and he ends up dying 12 days later. Now, this is normally where the historians stop, but this is also where the questions begin and when the conspiracy starts to take hold. So, the speed of the collision is very interesting because this is not a collision where Patton normally would have gotten paralyzed had the injuries that he had. There was no autopsy done, which makes sense, you want to respect him, but also, if there was any, this could have been a conspiracy. They definitely should have done an autopsy, figured out what was going wrong. There was a rapid burial, and there wasn't really a thorough investigation done. And the witness memories, of course, were conflicting, which is interesting. Now, none of these prove anything, but together there is a certain fog that comes upon the story, and this is where the speculation lives. Now, there are many allegations and many different conspiracies involved in this. Some people say U.S. intelligence was involved because Patton was a liability. Some people say the people in the hospital killed him. There are also some people saying, maybe it was the Russian influence. For some reason, the USSR killed him. And even Cold War, something related to kind of the beginning of the Cold War there. But the theories are disputed, and they rely on secondhand testimony and things like that. But one thing is for sure, something weird happened on that day in December. I think this conspiracy probably survived because it is at least a little bit plausible. Patton was a very fiery character. He was a very good general, but he also did not care what his superiors said. There was a lot of post-war power struggles between big players in World War II. The institutions definitely had a reason to take him out. He was being a liability and ruining the relationship between the US and the Soviets. And it also started the beginning of this Cold War secrecy where they were withholding secrets from the civilians. Whether he was killed or not, whether he was intentionally assassinated or not, his death did solve a problem, and that is naturally going to breed conspiracy. And that's why people still ask the questions to this day. Now, I'm going to give you guys my personal opinion. Personally, I think there was a lot of very interesting stuff that happened regarding his death. I don't necessarily think that he was assassinated. I think there's way more to this story than we ever know. I think it could have been a disgruntled soldier for all it could have been. But I'll break it down. The most convincing evidence for me, read Bill O'Reilly's book called Killing Patton, whether you agree with the conspiracy claim or not. Really good book. I love Bill O'Reilly. He's a great writer. But the truck that hit Patton was not on hardly any registries. There is a theory that someone shot a paralyzing bullet of some sort into his spine because the collision couldn't have caused that injury. So I think it's really interesting that the two people in the truck immediately drove off, couldn't be identified, still haven't been identified to this day. We don't know who hit him. The truck was not in any registry, like I said. I think there's just way too much stuff in this story for it to be a coincidence. I think that Patton was not naturally killed. I don't think it was a natural death. I'm not going to go so far as to say the intelligence killed him or anything like that, but definitely I think he was assassinated, 100%. So yeah, I just want to say Patton was an amazing man, a great general. All of his troops loved him. He was a good general. He was a brilliant man. He spent his whole life charging forwards. He never slowed down. And of course, he never stopped to play politics. He could care less what Eisenhower had to say, especially hated Montgomery, of course. No, he just did whatever he wanted. And I think there's something inspiring about that, too. And whether he died by chance or by convenience, I think he always reminds us of something important, which is that history doesn't just remember the winners, but it also buries the problems. Patton was a brilliant man, and most people would know him by his brilliance as a general. But most people forget how he died and what happened and the circumstances surrounding that. And sometimes the most dangerous man is the one that actually survives the war. If Patton had survived, who knows? We could have gone to war with the Soviet Union. You never know. So, guys, hope you enjoy this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the conspiracy surrounding General Patton's death, and hope you guys have a great day. God bless.